Doo-doo. Okay, awesome. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our final exam review for VIDI 301. If at any point anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me, ask questions. But this will be the same format as our previous exams. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and start sharing my screen so we can get started. Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Okay, cool. So hopefully you guys can see my screen. So this is the plan for the rest of the semester. We have today we have our exam review over Zoom, which is to make it inclusive for our online folks. So I'm just going to go over lectures 9 and 10 today over Zoom. Then on Wednesday this week, the 14th, we will have our final exam review in person, an opportunity for Q&A, and we'll also have our class party as well. So we will be bringing some food, there'll be beverages, it'll be a laid back, relaxed time, just celebrating the end of the semester. Then we will have our final exam online Monday, the 19th, and then we will have no class the 21st, and that will be the end of the semester. So that will be, yay, that'll be summer break for those of you guys who aren't taking summer classes. So that is a thing. So yeah, if you guys have any questions on that, just let me know. For the best preparation for this final exam, the best thing you can do is to review the YouTube exam prep videos that we've done for exams 1 and 2. Also go back and review the physical exams themselves and quizzes, and that should be enough information to fully prepare you for the final exam. And it will be cumulative. It will be all of the lectures that we have talked about this semester. So it should be fun. Okay, so that's what we will be covering. So let's go ahead and hop into lecture 9, vineyard diseases. Okay. So for vineyard diseases, we spent some time discussing like the differences between fungi, bacteria, and viruses. So being able to identify which disease belongs to like which of those categories will be very important for the exam. Also understanding like what the disease cycle is and why we have to attack these things at certain parts of the disease cycle so they don't get worse, but also the most efficient way to be rid of these diseases as well, right? Okay, so we have the disease triangle, which was very similar to our pest triangle, right? So understanding that all 3 of these components need to come together for a disease to happen. And then, but the difference is instead of a pest, we're talking about a pathogen, which could be a bacteria, virus, or a fungus, fungi. Cool. So a lot of the quiz will be very similar, or a lot of the exam will be very similar to the quizzes that you have taken. So anatomy of fungi is very important, understanding how it reproduces, right? The modes of transport for these things will also be focused on the exam, understanding how things are spread. That's very important. And then having an understanding for each of the diseases we talked about in these presentations will also be very important. So understand the difference between like black rot, powdery mildew, downy mildew, eutypa, all those things will be important. So if it helps you to make like a flashcard of each of those things, you'll be very prepared, right? So black rot, the big thing that I want you guys to take away is, we talked about the mummies serving as a secondary inoculum for later in the growing season and are the primary source of how the fungus will overwinter, right? So then that's part of like the disease cycle of black rot, right? Botrytis, if you've taken the winemaking classes, this will be relatively familiar to you. Understanding, I think one more component that I would recommend you understand for the exam is knowing what makes certain varieties or situations prone for these things to happen, right? So if we go back to this triangle, think about, I mean, we understand what the susceptible host is, but what is the favorable environment? What environment is creating this to happen? That's one way that understanding that you can prevent that from happening in your vineyard, right? And there's a little bit about susceptible hosts in there too, right? A lot of these vines that are highly susceptible to these things are Vitis vinifera, European grapevines, and that's why we have a lot of hybridization happening and even rootstocks happening in the vineyard, right? It's because the American varieties are much more strong of a defense to these things. Okay, so like in regards to bunch rot and botrytis, I would want you to know that the varieties that have tight clusters or are in humid, wet areas are highly susceptible to botrytis, right? And then knowing the symptoms. Cool. So for the variety or the types of diseases that we've shared the disease cycle, that'd be a really good question for an exam. I might just share the picture, or I might ask you a question of asking you to summarize the concept of overwintering or the disease cycle of botrytis. And that could easily be a really good essay question. So make sure you understand how, insect or mechanical damage hurts the clusters, the rot starts to form, the rot progresses, bunches left on the vine will overwinter, and then those spores will make the disease spread worse and worse, to be more severe every year. Cool. Downy mildew. Again, know the symptoms, know what makes it what it is. The big things to be looking for are the mosaic oil-like spots on the bottom side of the leaf only, never on the top. And then also these like leathery, dried up berries in bunches. Cool. Powdery mildew is much like just my light just went out, sorry, is just a powder that just covers the surface of something. So it is what it sounds. And we have this one all over vineyards everywhere. So this one affects us for sure, along with botrytis. Cool. Eutypa dieback. Important to know that this is like a woody tissue disease that kills vines from the trunk. That would actually be a really good like multiple choice question, is at what part of the vine does this disease attack? And it would be either like trunk or the leaf, or like leaves and berries, something along those lines. That'd be a really good multiple choice question for something like Eutypa versus powdery mildew versus something else, right? Or maybe like an insect vector, right? Cool. And then we have another example of Eutypa dieback disease cycle. So either of the diseases that I showed you, the disease cycle, be prepared to talk about that disease cycle. So whether it's Eutypa or botrytis, be prepared to explain that cycle and how it reproduces and like proliferates. Okay, so moving from fungal to bacterial pathogens, fungal is the biggest subject for disease, so that we have a lot of examples there. Just a couple for bacterial and virus, but it's important to know the difference between how fungal diseases start versus how bacteria infections start. So fungus is, let's just go back to that slide, sorry. So we think of fungus, think of like molds, microscopic organisms that have bodies composed of like, they have multicellular components, right? As compared to, skipping forward, sorry, to bacteria. Bacteria is single-celled organisms that can cause disease. So a lot of fungi depend on like decaying organic matter. Like bacteria will just they just live naturally in the environment along with fungi and viruses, right? But there's positive and negative ones, and they will also attack through an open wound. But they don't produce spores, and they don't necessarily overwinter like fungi do. They will just live and then reproduce and keep reproducing if they have the nutrients that are available that they need, right? So it's important to know the differences between those. Okay. Grape crown gall is a really good example of a soil-borne bacterium. And it might even be a really good essay question to ask, like, what the difference between grape crown gall and Eutypa is, considering that they both attack the woody parts of the vines. So if I did ask that question on the exam, it'd be nice for you to say, like, one is fungal versus one is bacterial, and maybe some symptoms, and what can cause it, right? That'd be a really good essay question. Cool. And then also we do introduce some insect vectors in this presentation too. So it's definitely really important to know that which diseases are as the result of a insect vector and which ones aren't. And also what that disease is and what the symptoms look like, right? Cool. And then last but not least, we have viral pathogens, which, think of virus, it's just a piece of genetic material that hijacks a whole system and then works to reproduce what it needs by hijacking that system, right? So understanding what it is compared to the bacteria and compared to the fungi and how it spreads, right? Okay, so some examples of viruses are grape leaf roll, and understanding the difference between leaf roll and red blotch disease will be important. That will most definitely be a question. I am fairly certain it was a question on your quiz, and it will definitely be on the exam. And I'll make sure that we are all caught up on grading quizzes. I'll do a mass grading tonight, but then I'll do another mass grading at the end of the week by Friday to make sure that you guys have those quizzes back so you can study off of those for the exam. Cool. And if for whatever reason I didn't or I forgot, just send me an email and I'll get that back to you. Don't ever be afraid to remind me. Okay. So yeah, red blotch versus leaf roll, helpful. Definitely will be some discussion about UCIPM. And you don't have to like open the website and memorize the website at all. Just understand that's a resource for gardeners or viticulturists or just farmers in general will be very helpful. And just give me like an explanation of what UCIPM is and the kind of information that it gives, right? That would be helpful. Cool. And then we have our learning objectives from lecture 9. So we'll go ahead and head on over to lecture 10. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me or even just shoot a message in the chat. It's no problem at all. Okay, so lecture 10, we talked about harvest measurements, and it's kind of odd to be talking about this in class right now because we're not even close to harvesting fruit in the vineyards, but it is part of our student learning objectives for this class, so I am required to teach it. We do practice this like actually in the winemaking class, and so if you feel like you took this class and for whatever reason you aren't taking the winemaking class, if you would like to see and get some hands-on experience, you're welcome to come in. I have an open door policy and come into the winemaking class and do the measurements firsthand there. Okay, so for the overview for grape harvest measurements, we're going to talk about grape ripening, berry development, the timing, and the measurements with Brix and pH, right? So being able to answer the question like, when should I harvest? And the exam will be very important. I just want you guys, the big takeaway from this presentation, one of them is I want you to understand is that there isn't like one ideal time to pick grapes. It depends a lot about the style of wine you're trying to make. It depends on your cost of production, availability of a crew, right? You have all these factors that line up. So at what, chemical composition to harvest the grapes and at what time depends on multiple factors. So I want you guys to understand that we don't just, pick everything on a Monday when it's 24 Brix. There's a lot of things that go into it, right? Okay, The berry ripening curve will absolutely be on the exam. So understanding that there are 3 stages, what happens at those stages, what things peak at certain stages, what things start at certain stages, being able to understand what veraison is will be very important. Again, you don't have to worry about all these little these words down here. This is much more of like the science perspective, chemistry perspective, excuse me, that we would apply more to the winemaking class and not so much for this one. I just want you guys to understand the ripening process. Okay, and then this slide has the information as to what happens at each stage. So just review this and the chart, and you should be in a really good spot. This kind of just re-emphasizes what I talked about a second ago about when to harvest depends on the style of wine that you're making, and then also there's non-berry factors too, right? So definitely understand those. And then for this class, we just talked about Brix and pH for compositional factors. So being able to define Brix, there will definitely be maybe a couple of equations dealing with potential alcohol. I will give you the formula because I feel like being nice. It's potential alcohol equals initial Brix times 0.6. So I'll put that on the question for you, but there might be some tricky wording just to make sure you're paying attention, just to challenge you guys as to how to calculate that, right? Okay. Also, it's important to know like these technical things, like if a Brix solution is negative, what does that mean? That means that there's alcohol present, right? Because alcohol is less dense than water. So definitely put a star on this last bullet point, highlight it, whatever. That's a really important thing to know. It's also important to know how to create a Brix solution too. So I'll probably put one question about how to create a Brix solution, and I will be nice. I will ask you to make 100 grams of total solution. So the big takeaway for that is to treat it like a piece of pie, right? So you want to, when you create a Brix solution, it's if you want to make a 1 Brix solution, it's 1 gram of sugar plus 99 grams of water equals 100 grams of solution, right? So 1% is sugar in that situation. So the correct answer would be 1 gram of sugar plus 99 grams of water, or the other correct answer would be 1 gram of sugar plus 99 milliliters of water. And that's because 1 gram of water equals 1 milliliter of water, right, at room temperature. So if you are confused about that, we can go over it in person on Wednesday. And like I said, I will be nice. I'll just make it out of 100. I won't ask you to scale it to like 2.5 liters or something. I'm not going to do that to you guys. But just be able to know how to create that Brix solution, I think, is important. Cool. How to sample grapes. I think it's important for you to be able to explain to me that it needs to be a statistically representative sample of a vineyard block. There might be a question about how to sample grapes, or how would you recommend to a friend how to sample grapes. The zigzag pattern, selecting grapes from all parts of the cluster, sampling at the same time of day every time that you sample, right? So like it's okay if you sample like once a week, but if you're doing mornings, stick to mornings, right? It's most ideal. And then taking mental notes of raisins, mildew, anything that might be of concern to the viticulturist that needs to be communicated, right? So that is important. And then this photo is just confirming that there is variation in the Brix, right, around the whole cluster. The causes of variation will be a really good conversation. This could be a select all that apply question. And I've made an effort to hopefully communicate to you guys when questions are select all that apply, it should say it in the prompt. And it's important to note that if you select an option and the select all that apply question that's incorrect, it actually counts negatively to your score. So even if there were 3 correct answers and you selected 2 that were correct and 1 that was incorrect, you'd only get 1 point, not 2 points, because you got 2 points minus 1. So 1 point out of 3, right? So if you're not sure, your best option is to not select that item. Cool. Okay. Determining the ripeness of grapes, we do this through a couple different ways, right? Sugar, acid, seed maturity. So we talk about seed maturity and tannins. Will be a really good question. Know what's happening there. And then also we got some really freestyle winemakers that just do it by taste. And that's totally legitimate process of doing it, but it takes a lot of experience to do it successfully. Cool. Methods of measurement were, for bricks especially, we had 2 different methods of measurement that we talked about. We talked about refraction and hydrometry. Definitely know the difference between those two, the devices that are used with refraction versus hydrometry, right? Hydrometry. Refraction, we used a refractometer, and with hydrometry, we use a hydrometer, right? So hydrometer does it through buoyancy. Refractometer uses refraction. So that should be hopefully really easy to remember how to use those, or what's used in those, right? I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions about the digital refractometer. That was just kind of like for your information. Okay, cool. One of the important things I want you to remember, though, is that the pocket refractometer is not accurate when measuring fermenting juices, because it doesn't interact well with the carbon dioxide in the juice, but also it does not account for alcohol. So it has a hard time accounting for that negative Brix component. It's really best used in the vineyard when you're measuring those grape samples. It's a great device. For the hydrometers, this one is the best option for measuring fermenting samples because it does compensate for negative Brix, but the bubbles from the carbon dioxide can affect this as well. So it can make it more buoyant than it actually is, right? So I'll put a big star on the slide. Sources of error and measurements. This will be a question on the exam. Cool. And then make sure you know that hydrometer is best for measuring fermenting juices, and a refractometer is best in the vineyard for grape samples. Then we have a temperature conversion chart for Brix reading. I will probably include this in the exam as a just checking up on you understanding how to utilize the chart. So I would give you a question. I'd provide the chart for you. And if you're worried that you are going to have a hard time reading this chart on your screen, I'm giving you the heads up and warning now. If you would like to print this and have it at home for your own use so you can have it available, then you're more than welcome to do that. So you can either take it just directly from the slide, or if you email me, I can give you the PDF directly so you can print it out, right? So I will do my best to make sure it's readable, but if you are worried, be prepared and print it out for yourself. So in the question, I'll keep it relatively straightforward. I would give you a degrees Brix, and it would be something on the table. I wouldn't say like 32, right? I'd give you either 30 or 35. And then I'd tell you what the temperature is. And it's up to you to find out where these intersect. So say we're at 23 degrees Celsius. Hopefully you can see my mouse. And then say we're at 30 degrees Brix. So this is a positive 0.2. So we would add 30 plus 0.2 equals 30.2 Brix. That would be your temperature compensation, right? And then likewise, if you were to get a negative number, like this part of the chart, you would subtract that number from the Brix, right? So there you have it. So just being able to display, you understand how to do that. Will definitely be on the exam. Okay. pH and wine. Just be able to explain, if you can tell me what pH is and why it's important, that will be the most important takeaways for me in this class. So what is pH? Give me the definition of what pH is and what it means in wine, right? So why it's important to wine, it determines the overall stability. The more accurate just pH definition is it's the measurement of free hydrogen ion activity in a solution, right? And wines are acidic. Wine is naturally very acidic. High acid versus low acid wine, there could be a true or false on that. This is generally pretty straightforward. A wine that's higher in acid is tart. A wine that's lower in acid is considered more viscous, kind of a better mouthfeel. That can also be called flabby, and that is a industry technical term. Unfortunately, I feel like it's so sad, flabby. Such a sad word. Okay, this is just a picture for your information. If you end up giving me this definition, that's also correct. Don't worry. I know all the definitions, so I will take all the answers that are correct. The thing that kind of gets people messed up sometimes is the pH scale and acidity levels. So the lower the pH, the higher the acidity. The higher the pH, the lower the acidity, right? So then you think back to the scale, 7 is neutral. Anything below 7 is increasingly acidic, and anything above 7 is increasingly basic. So that's where things get swapped sometimes, right? We sometimes will accidentally say, oh, well, it's high acidity and high pH. It's like, oop, it's opposite. It's high acid and low pH. So that might be a good true or false question to sneak up on you guys. For the ways to measure pH, I'm not going to ask you. If I ask you a question about this, it'll have to do more with questioning the accuracy of litmus paper and a universal indicator versus a pH probe. And the answer would be that a pH probe was much, much more accurate than the following because a pH probe actually gives you decimal information. So it'll actually give you 2 decimal points of data usually, compared to all these color indicators are, very hard to tell the difference and will only give you whole numbers. So that would be a good question. And then we have our learning objectives. Cool. So I am just going to go back to our class schedule really quick and reiterate, what the plan is for the folks that join us a little bit later. So for this week, like we're just finishing up our Zoom final exam review right now. Everyone is welcome Wednesday to come to class if they'd like. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A for anyone that has questions. If we do not have any questions, we will just go ahead and move into our class party segment. We'll be bringing food and beverages. You're welcome to snack while we do exam review. It's really whatever you guys want to do. If you want to pull up the last 2 exams and work through the questions together as a review, you're welcome to do that. Or if you feel confident and you don't want to do that, we can just celebrate the end of the semester. So it's up to you guys. Everyone's welcome. It's at 6 p.m. and A105, our usual meeting. Monday, a week from today, we'll have our final exam. You'll have all day to take it from 9 a.m. to right before midnight and submit it, right? And I will give you guys 3 hours to complete your exam. And then Wednesday, we have no class. That'll be the end of the semester. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. But otherwise, that's everything. And thank you guys for everything. Thanks for a great semester.
You're welcome.